Hello, everyone. Whoever's listening, it's another day. I'm back on YouTube for the moment, but yesterday I had my X account hacked, and wanted to respond to that. Thinking about what to do. It's a bit disconcerting. 2 days before that, on this weekend, I kind of started a war, declared war basically on the integrated system plan, and laid out my reasons for that. And that had gone really well on X. Many thousands of views and very warm, encouraging response from lots of people. And then my X account got hacked and I lost control of it. Still haven't got it back yet. Elon, if you're listening, anyone at X, if you can help me, I'm Quixotic Quant. Whoever's got control of that account right now is not me. I'd like to get it back. Lots of work in there. But yeah, wanted to respond and continue and try to handle the situation in a way that can hopefully contribute well to debate and best inform public policy debate in the future. And there's going to be a lot that is going to be said about my motives in doing this, and this is a sort of unconventional and risky move. So I wanted to take a few minutes to spell out like why, and do it face to camera, partly because my X account is hacked, and I think that whilst there's risk about forgeries and falsehoods and whatever else, sort of the first days of a war, all the cyber stuff comes out, right? But the truth gets through. Real combat looks similar later on, and I think that face to camera is the best way of doing this for a little while, just to kind of try to make as clear as possible why I'm doing this. Unpolished, I'm sorry. I've got just a very short couple of pages of notes, nothing else to go on. But I hope that people, if they're interested, will share this. I don't know whether it'll go very widely, but I wanted to continue and sort of commit to certain steps. So first, just reflect on the declaration of war and why I did it, and just wanted to rehash for a moment why I think that was necessary and why I'm not backing away from it and committed to the next steps. The integrated system plan is transparently an instrument of governments of the day. And nobody realises this. And the nail in the coffin was the 82% renewable energy target being forced onto all the scenarios as a binding constraint. So the integrated system plan starts with assume success for all government policies before doing any objective analysis about what could happen, what's cheapest to happen, what's most likely to happen. And that's a disaster, utter disaster. So I retract nothing. It is necessary to take odd and extreme measures to highlight the severity of what is a completely untenable, absurd situation that we've got ourselves in. It has to be recanted from the highest level, otherwise it risks doing more catastrophic damage, I think, to the reputation of the market operator and the current leaders there, and around the energy institutions. I'll get to that in a minute. So why am I doing that? Look, and I want to emphasize for a moment that this is me doing this on my own old Miltech and Tack channel that I haven't used for quite a while now. I started this off before I was at CIS. I'm just going to put this onto my own private channel for a little bit. Believe me, nobody else has told me that this is a good idea to go online and start calling for resignations and saying something's really stupid and needs to be withdrawn from debate. But it's extreme circumstances are called for here, and it's my decision alone. Believe me, I'm sure there's lots of people at work who are kind of nervous about this. This is not what traditional think tank work looks like. And if I ran it by anybody, I'm sure lots of people would push back. And that's at Centre for Energy Studies and all the people that I know in the energy debate and industry and politics. Look, hey, I talk to everyone, of course. There's more friends sort of one side of politics than the other, and I want to inform all sides of politics. But I've kind of just cloistered myself off from all of them. I've heard lots of messages of support, lots of places, but I'm not being very conversational for a bit because during the opening days of a war, the history books will look back and have lots to say about conspiracies about how it all started. And for the benefit of, I think, hopefully the peace afterwards, I'm doing this off my own bat, totally off my own bat. And I do hope that the Centre for Independent Studies in the medium term maybe sort of realises this is a totally unconventional but quite necessary thing to have happen, and don't totally disown me, but I respect if they feel they need to put a little bit of distance and sort of, in the short term. This is going way off script for someone who's been a research policy lead in a very serious think tank. That's to one side, but why is it necessary? And why is it necessary for someone who's tried very hard to engage through a think tank? It started before with my own passion and analysis, but in the very best way of having this factual, rigorous, hopefully evidence-based debate. That's what we're all aiming for. That's what we all want. And we've got to this point where that debate has now been totally debased. It's basically impossible for us to continue having productive contributions to debate when what we end up with is just naked appeals to authority. It just trivializes things, and it's frustrating, it's sad and hopeless to see. The 7:30 report, a debate between the energy minister and a shadow energy minister, right? And it comes down to this sort of stupid, awkward, but who do you trust? Do you trust the experts? I trust the experts. Then in the response, you get kind of but what about this fact of the experts? I think, do you dispute that fact? I'm sorry, this is insane. This is utterly insane and childish. But it's been said by the government and their spokespeople just one too many times. Look, come on, I trust the independent experts. How dare you malign the independent experts? Someone has to do it. Someone has to crash through and say, yep, we do question the independence of the experts. No, and it's necessary now. It's not that I want to. It's essential now because I trust what the experts have told us. And they have told us that they have assumed success of government policies before they start doing any independent expert analysis from there, right? And this is just a hopeless bias in the debate. It is totally unfair that this is allowed to continue. Totally unfair. That this report that's been masqueraded for so long as being optimal and as being sort of least cost, etc., is only optimal and only least cost if we assume that all government policy is good, true, and right and will be accomplished. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. And I hope people get that extreme times call for extreme measures. This is something that needs to be called out as being utterly untenable and extremely bad, extremely wrong. This is a debate, unfortunately, where the quality of one party's analysis should be pitted against the quality of another party's analysis. And that looks like Reputex, right? The same Reputex report, which gave us the $275 number, right? Pitched against the Frontier analysis, privately commissioned analyses, right, from different private companies the two parties put forward. But that's the fair and square kind of even Stevens debate, and it is maddening to see this situation where just could you dare question the experts is all that we have as a substance to debate. And including for Frontier, right? All the critiques are kind of but it assumes that it could go this fast. And it is. It's just an assumption. We know the coalition said, look, we think this is the time frame. We want you to assume, model that, right? But on the other hand, you have the 82%, it's 80 gigawatts, of new capacity installed in the next 6 years, and nobody even questions, right? Whether that is kind of a viable alternative or not. There's no question because it's written into the damn ISP in every freaking scenario, right? There is no scenario where that does not occur. The kind of seal of authority and respect that we should hold for our independent experts, AEMO, has been marked completely on the government's policy. It's insane. It's impossible for us to have a civil, fact-focused, somewhat objective debate when AEMO has put themselves in that position. And so, look, no one wants to cast the first stone, and so I will, right? And I should also mention that I've tried in every possible way through my work on Twitter, on X, and also the formal work that's done through the Centre for Independent Studies. Watch some of our videos. Read, if you want, all of our submissions that we've made to a whole bunch of regulatory process. We've engaged in good faith. We've published reports. openly, that have got review from various peers. Like, we've done our absolute level best to engage in the facts as long as we can. And we'll continue, by the way, I don't want to resign from the CIS. We'll continue to do those fact-based engagements in all the formal processes. But yet for all that work, we still not get to the point where the facts carry and can be reported on in the media, because it is forbidden somehow to question the independence of the independent experts that have produced the ISP. And GenCost, right? Unfortunately, GenCost is drawn to this too, because the lead author has said plain as day that he does not want to publish the details of his calculations for fear of more or less contradicting the ISP. Now the ISP, I'm saying it, is dead, must be buried for hygiene purposes. We are at sea, but we should acknowledge it. We're at sea. We have Frontier and Reputex, Liberal Party Commission report versus Labor Party Commission report. That is all it is. The government's expertise, their officialdom, has to be expunged and removed from the debate. It's extreme. It's sad, but it is where we are. So I want to take this very seems to be a dramatic, but I think it's essential. I want to explain from it why I think it is just so essential. Step of starting to call for resignations, and believe me, there is no one who I have floated this with who said, "Yeah, that's a good idea." In fact, every vibe that I get from all quarters of all the friends and all the people that are involved in helping support, the work, would not have suggested this, I'm sure. So let me explain why I think it is the right thing to do, and give my best defense, although I'll cop a lot in return, of why I think it is part of what should be a return to a civil, transparent, facts-oriented discourse. All right? And it is because I think it's the natural and good faith thing to do when things start to look really bad. When you get to the point of impugning motives, or saying something fishy or alleging conspiracy, right? It's sort of, we do this difficult little dance, right? And it could not get, it's become impossible for me to do, right? So this difficult little dance where you're going to say, oh, that looks really bad, and that doesn't look very impartial, and you made a mistake here, and but you can't risk impugning their motives. You can't question the sincerity of all the people involved, right? And look, fair enough. And I genuinely think that most people involved, right, have got their heart in the right place. Very much. And I'll try to give every benefit of the doubt consistently through this work to that. But there's that awkward conflict where you can't say honestly what the facts are and how they look without risking impugning someone's motives, because it looks like something amazingly dodgy has occurred, something unbelievable, something that does not pass the sniff test. So what do? Look, and I think that actually calling for resignations are the necessary, right thing to do in order to try to give the greatest benefit of the doubt and not make it necessary to impugn people's motives, to say, hey, look at the facts on the ground. This is how it looks. I don't want it to be because you've done something wrong or done some crazy conspiracy or some nefarious plot. But it looks sufficiently bad that if you want to make your motives beyond reproach, you probably need to acknowledge that it looks that bad, rather than continue to defend yourself, rather than trying to explain, because there's a risk of it just looking like more and more covering up. And so to keep your motives and make it less personal, less about saying there's some horrible conspiracy or plot somewhere, I think we've got to the point where people need to say, yep, I can see how that looks. See, that looks bad. I did not mean or try to do anything wrong here, but because to make it clear, to make it beyond reproach, because the institutions I work and lead for need to be beyond reproach, I will take acknowledgement for allowing the situation that looks like this, could look like this, and step down. That's my take. Most of these institutions are mostly made of very good people that are hardworking and professional. But there is a risk here that if we do not call out quickly when things start to look untenable, conflicted, contradictory, when processes have been breached, when rules have been broken, when things have been tucked at the bottom of drawers and kind of covered up. It's incumbent on people that are the leadership of these sort of high organizations to acknowledge when things look sufficiently bad and say, to help protect the integrity of the organization and their reputation. They rely on that. They rely on trust, right? Social license, right? It's meant to matter in this transition. I will step down and acknowledge how that looks and own up, right? So I will do my best to not allege a conspiracy or anything similar like that, right? But like, I genuinely believe in the next few years, if Labor government wins and they continue down this path of pushing Australia in the current energy direction they want to do it, all renewables and just a bit of gas to back it up, right? That'll have bad consequences for Australia for sure. But like, when the current things that are indelibly put in the record get dissected eventually, we're going to end up in a situation where it looks so bad that allegations there is some horrible deep conspiracy and the entire public service is working for one side and trying to cover things up will come out, right? Like, and I don't want us to end up in that hyper-polarized situation like we should kind of see in America, right? Like we call to drain the swamp. That's not where I want us to be. Our public service is, by and large, have their heart in the right spot. But when something stinks so bad, I think just occasionally it is necessary to peel off a little bit of scum from the top if it smells, to prove that the water underneath is clear and we don't have a swamp that needs to be drained. That's sort of what I'm going for. It's better now that people in places of senior leadership, for the sake of keeping their organizations and the agenda they're working from beyond reproach, need to acknowledge that how things kind of look is untenable and does not contribute to building faith in the projects and businesses and ambitions that they currently working for. So that's my take. It's extreme, it's unconventional, it's my choice alone, but I'm going to start calling for resignations. And the first one is someone that you probably wouldn't expect. It's Grant Kean. Now, why wouldn't you expect him? You wouldn't necessarily expect this because he's actually faced calls for not resignation, but investigations on his integrity and whether he's compromised from the exact polar opposite kind of think tank, the one I work for, the Australia Institute. And they were concerned because of his links to fossil fuels and carbon sequestration, and he had some business interests in carbon farming and trying to basically take carbon out of the atmosphere. So they don't want things that make fossil fuels seem more viable and good, obviously, I think, to be supported, and thought there was a conflict there. And so Grant's faced these calls for scrutiny, to say the least, and that's fair enough. And he survived them. And from what I can tell at a glance, while there weren't perfect procedures in that place, he's done his best to recuse himself from situations where that conflict exists. And also, he's made very open comments about nuclear, right? So he's said some nice things about nuclear. And in fact, one read of the news suggests that he's been axed kind of because he's outed himself as suggesting that we need to have nuclear in the debate, and seems like he's softly aligned with that kind of idea, which may have been, not good enough for him going on as climate change chair, which I think it's a shame as well. He's been pushed out with nuclear. So anyway, cut to the chase. All I'm trying to say is that he's not someone that necessarily I have any deep-seated motive to attack. In fact, in the circles that I move in now through my work, like literally at the event, a cocktail party at the start of an event, at Centre for Independent Studies, talking to people who know Grant. I've never met the guy, but say the very nicest things about him. Say that he's extremely sincere, very intelligent, absolutely concerned about doing things well and right. And so I don't know this guy. I heard nothing but glowing praise from my circles, but still, I think in this situation, he's in a role which is utterly untenable for the ongoing faith in the energy transition and certainly Transgrid to be beyond reproach. And so it's the consistent and right thing that I should do to point this out, how it looks, right? and say, I think the right thing to do is to resign. So why is it so bad? And people often ask, and like I'm sure lots of people that are more pissed off with than me, by the way, about the energy transition and all the forces that are bringing it about in the way that it's going. There's plenty of angry farmers out there who are very unhappy about what's happening. And people sort of ask me or muse about the idea that there could be sort of fat cats in the public service or in senior positions of policy or the lobbying world, angling for changes in policy making. And then they're able to sort of, revolve the doors and quickly swing around into areas in plum positions that puts them in like fantastic positions to profit from the decisions that they were influencing, right? And that sounds conspiratorial and nasty. That impugns the motives of these people, but that's something that is a legitimate question to ask, and it shouldn't happen, right? And so I would like to be able to say that I have never seen anything like that, and I don't think that that's something that's likely to occur. But I can't say that when what has occurred looks like the picture postcard, most clear, precise, most undisputable example of that happening. Let me spell it out, right? So the integrated system plan, all right, lots of people stand to benefit from various things this puts forward, right? There is no company in Australia that stands to benefit more, faster, sooner, and more directly from things that the ISP sets in motion through the regulatory process, right? Then Transgrid. Transgrid is, if there is any company in Australia, the number one prime, most direct beneficiary of what the ISP does. If anyone wants to dispute that, good luck. But they are building all the giant stuff in Victoria and New South Wales, or will be soon, maybe once AEMO sells the half they're building. Anyway, I'll try to avoid getting bogged down in the details, but there is no one positioned like Transgrid. HumeLink is the project, the biggest project that is priced in the ISP, and the sum that, hey, are now going to cost more, that are sunk costs and therefore don't have to be cost. But anyway, right, like it's the biggest project that now has a number in it in the ISP. It's not quite $5 billion, but it's 4.6 or something. It was thought to be 4.9, and anyway, let's call it 5 approximately. Let's round it up, single digits, right? Something like $5 billion is going to be added to Transgrid's asset base, and they will get a regulated return on that for ever, basically, 40, 50 years at least, right? And that is the first project and the nearest project to being complete that has just gone through the regulatory process just now. So there is just no doubt in my mind. I don't think there's nothing about what I've said there that I think can be questioned, right? The ISP shovels billions of dollars straight into Transgrid's coffers at the expense of energy consumers through this tight regulatory procedure. Now, what you can contest if you want, but I put it on the record so many times, is that HumeLink's process looks the worst. It looks so dodgy. The regulatory hurdles and things that have been done, and I'll talk more about stuff that the regulator's done in another video, but of all the projects, and I think I've said, under parliamentary privilege, I've said that I think there is no way in which a serious argument can be mounted that advancing it at the schedule that it's being advanced right now by the proponent can be argued to be in the interest of consumers. So consumers are being fleeced lots of money by this project. It looks dodgy. It's the dodgiest of the lot, right? Consumers are being fleeced. Well, look, I don't know. I hope it's defensible. I've said I think there's no way of arguing for it. I hope that's the case. Come on, sue me if you want. Let's have the argument in court. Right? That process looks horrendous, and there is one critical policy, two maybe, but definitely one is named, 82% renewable energy, and that is named in the ISP as being critical. I think the words are main driver or something like that. There's in Appendix 6, page 50 or 60 something. I'm not looking at all the detailed notes now. Other people can look this up and just prove it. It's plastered all over my X account if it hasn't already all been deleted. But the 82% renewable energy policy is named as being one of the main drivers for this project needing to be advanced on the schedule that the ISP advanced. Now, and by the way, the schedule that the ISP says is actually 3 years later than what's been approved, and there's some stupid technical loophole, which I've spoken lots about, and go look at it. It's appalling. No one seems to care. Anyway, catch up on all that if you want. But that policy decision, 82%, is instrumental, without a doubt, in the regulatory process that shovels billions of dollars into the pockets of Transgrid. And we've traced back, how did that policy get adopted, right? And this was not policy that came or was recommended from the ISP, right? This came from Reputex, from that Labor Party Commission report that was from before they got elected, right? Making promises that said you get $275 off your bills, right? 82% was not a recommended policy in that report. It was a projected consequence of policy, right? So they hadn't said they'd adopt that. The report of Reputex, with its whatever technical credibility on the line, it has said that we would get to 82% if they adopted the policy of rewiring the nation, which is subsidising a whole bunch of transmission. Needless to say, I think none of that stacks up. I think that's terrible and discredited and pretty thoroughly disgraced by now. But that was not when it became official government policy, which is what was instrumental in shoveling billions of dollars over into Transgrid at the moment, right? The policy transition occurred. It occurred in a December statement to Parliament by Chris Bowen. This is when it became all official. It's the climate change statement. This is an official statement that's made once a year. The first one was in 2022. I think it was 1st of December, right? And that statement references clearly advice of the Climate Change Authority, right? And that's given another statement a few weeks before. It was in November, right? They have to, and it's not even disputable with this advice. This is written into law that this body writes advice to the government before this makes a statement. It's all you couldn't make this up. It's ridiculously ironclad. That is a statement of advice to government, and they did adopt 82% right at that moment in that statement, right? And in the middle of that statement of advice from the Climate Change Authority is this nice big feature. It's not 82%, it's 83% by 1 year later, the 2030-31 year. But it's basically sort of saying, giddy up, go. This looks ambitious, but it's what you'd have to do according to the ISP to get there. So it looks to me like a suggestion that you're on the right path, and is part of that supporting kind of infrastructure, those trappings of state that makes it reasonable and official to make this official government policy, as opposed to just a Labor Party projection of what should happen, like the $275, what should happen if you adopted some other policy. So the process of getting there, look, it already, it's so tenuous. It really stinks. But what I think is ultimately just unviable is that the signature on the front of that piece of advice that was given just before to government, of that policy being adopted, which led to billions of dollars through this Humeling project going to Transgrid, is Grant Kean. Grant Kean was the chair of the Climate Change Authority when that advice was given to government. And not that long ago, in 2024, he slipped out of the Climate Change Authority chair, and it looks, if you read some of the articles, it looks like it's partly because he was potentially anti-nuclear, got booted out. Maybe, I don't know, I don't really know that. But he walked straight into being chair of the board of Transgrid, right after it passing these crucial hurdles, right? The feedback loop in particular, which I've written heaps about, no more details required. So, what do you think? Am I crazy? I just don't think that passes the pub test. This is insane. And again, I'm not trying to say that he knew that's what would happen or he conspired to make it so, right? But it is just so wildly clear, the conflict of interest, so absolutely transparently clear that stepping into the chairmanship of a company that is about to take off, that just limped through a dodgy seeming regulatory process on the back of a policy that you gave formal advice on, it doesn't fly. It just doesn't fly, right? It looks so bad, in my opinion. Can you imagine the conversation at the barbecue, right, or the pub, did you hear about the the new director, the new chairman of Transgrid. Oh yeah, what's he earning? I bet it's more than you and me. And like, gee, what timing? Like, that company's in a rocket ship. Did you hear they've just got this massive transmission project passed? Like, for some reason faster than they need to because it's meant to connect to Snowy 2.0 and it's not even ready yet. Gee, what did he do before that? Like, how do you get that kind of plum job? Oh, he gave advice. What on? Targets like about renewables and carbon budgets, that kind of stuff. Oh, right. Hang on, so what was the excuse that they wrote down in the paperwork that actually got this over the regulatory hurdles years before it was required, like years before even snow would be finished? Oh yeah, it's because there's policy. What's the policy? Oh, it's, renewables targets, carbon budgets, that sort of thing. Could it be the same no version of that story can be remotely true, and it be proper and fair and fit in a democracy. Anyway, I've said enough. Grant King, I don't think that you're a bad guy. I don't think that you knew what was going on. But what happened with, and it's part of the absurdity that the ISP has created to create this iron-bound link through our regulatory process, which now I think is totally legally fraught because any input to policy has this hardwired relationship to outcomes in the planning process that forces consumers to pay for stuff. It shouldn't just be you, by the way. It should be anyone that's had anything to do with some kind of policy that gets, literally ironclad forced into our regulatory documents, right? It's impossible. It's illegal for people to think about assumptions that don't include policy success. I don't think you comprehended at the time that that's what was going to happen. But it's essential now, and yes, I'm on a mission. Call this a stunt if you want. I'm on a mission to make sure Australia wakes up and understands how absurd it is that we have this ISP document that is just pretending that all policy of the government of Dane must be successful. And one of the consequences is that there is this ridiculously tight link between advice that Grant King gave as chair of the Climate Change Authority and the company he now chairs getting $5 billion from consumers, I think prematurely. And there'll probably be much more with VNI West, etc. So anyway, that's one consequence of how it looks. And yes, I'm desperate to do whatever is required to make sure the full gravity of the absurdity of the situation is realised. And here's why. Because we have very clear evidence that the current chair of the Climate Change Authority also doesn't yet get it. He doesn't get that it's the case that the ISP has just railroaded us onto the assumption that all government policy is going to occur and then rebranded as optimal. He doesn't get it. And in his case, it's even simpler. And I think the case for calling for resignation is far more straightforward, right? Because at the most recent Senate estimates, he went on and basically shouted down a coalition senator who was trying to ask questions, I think fairly reasonable questions, about whether all the facts that are supported by the technical authorities really do say that nuclear is too much more expensive, right? So Matt Kean is engaged ferociously in this debate, and he's doing so now with the imprimatur of being the chair of the Climate Change Authority, and his sword and shield absolutely. And please watch the footage, right? Please watch the footage of this particular instance. Ross Cadell, latest Senate estimates, the Climate Change Authority, right? Matt Kean stares into the camera 3 times over, and even when faced with evidence to the contrary that the ISP does not test whether the path towards renewables is cheaper than a path without renewables, with less renewables, he says that's what it does, right? He says it back again and again and again, even when given perfectly adequate countervailing evidence from the ultimate authority, Merrin York, one of the ISP authors, one of the senior guys at AEMO. He said, so Matt Kean is swinging absolutely ferociously in this debate, trying to shut down, I think in the most aggressive and brutal ways, coalition senators asking reasonable questions about the evidence and just saying, trust the authority. The ISP says, this is what the ISP does. And he is 100% wrong in those instances about what the ISP does. 100% wrong. This is insane. This is absurd. This is extreme. And I hope, and again, trying to give the best opportunity for any benefit of the doubt to fall to anyone that Matt Kean does not yet know, right? Like his predecessor did not know what the ISP actually would do with basically forcing all of government policy to be assumed successful in every scenario in the integrated system plan. Because if he did know, by the way, he has got up and forcefully lied in Parliament, right? And I've just been like, again, I'm just so sick of it. Like, we've been to these parliamentary inquiries, right? And I've been like, in an official capacity as representing Centre for Studies, and several times, multiple times over, we get read this statement that says, look, hey, this is an official legal proceeding of the Parliament. It is a serious offence to make false and misleading representations, etc. Maybe treated with contempt. Like, everyone does this, and estimates have done the same thing too, right? Like, but Matt Kean's only defence from an accusation that he has lied forcefully about what the ISP does in order to shut down inquiries about nuclear from a coalition senator is that he's got no idea how the ISP works. No idea that actually the counterfactual that he's referring to has all of government policy railroaded into it as assuming success as well. Like, and I think it's absurd. I think it's untenable. How can the chair of the Climate Change Authority continue to sit and make these statements about the ISP when he has no idea about how the ISP works? That or he's lying. One or the other. And so I think, again, for Matt Kean to try to prove that he and the Climate Change Authority and the government who's plucked him into, they've put him in there. He used to be a Liberal. He's defected, right? Like, I don't know, I won't try to tiptoe around the politics of it, but like, lots of people say lots of things that are less trustful about Matt Kean's motives. But his only way of saying that he did not lie aggressively multiple times over, even when faced with contradictory evidence in Parliament, is to say that he's got no idea about how the ISP works. And yes, I'm doing everything I can to get everyone to realise how the ISP actually works and what it actually does and doesn't show. Because we face an emergency, like an utter crisis in our planning, our regulatory system, if we don't wake up and realise how bad this really is. And yes, it's going to hurt, and everyone would advise me, don't make it personal, don't attack people. Like, it's not about the people, it's about the arguments. But we've been doing our best with the arguments, and now we've got this point where we've just got repeated naked appeals to authority. And there's no choice, I think, other than to rip off the Band-Aid and say, you know what? Those authorities did not test what you think they tested. They cannot be used for those arguments. And because they have been so fiercely and forcefully used in the political debate for those arguments before, something dramatic has to happen in order for that situation to be called out. And it should come for the benefit of keeping the potential motives and the integrity of these organisations and these institutions, these processes clear. It should come from the highest levels, and I can't see how it's done seriously enough without people stepping down. So they're the first two who I'm doing my best to say must step down from their current positions, because what it looks like happened looks so bad that if it wasn't done deliberately, they should acknowledge it. They should acknowledge it, and for the benefit of the institutions and organisations they work for and the projects and the agendas they want to push to be beyond reproach and not maligned, I think they should step down. I think that's where it's at. And I'm not done yet. I'll do some more videos soon. I think there's more to come. Can't avoid this. I want to telegraph it early. In fact, again, it feels like war. The cyber stage has started, but I'm doing this off my own bat. I think it's the right thing. But I will do videos separately on all of the people that sit on the Energy Advisory Panel. That's the heads of AEMO, also the regulator, also the Market Commission. Now that it's become transparently clear that the ISP is beyond rescue, it needs to be expunged from debate, needs to be retracted. A whole bunch of organisations that have done what looks like work to fluff and preen the feathers of the ISP and protect it from legitimate critiques. I'll have to go there, and I commit to now, right? Like, because if I don't, someone else has got to me, right? Someone else has told me that I shouldn't, but it's my decision too. I've made the decision already to go there. I don't see how those organisations' actions look good enough to be defended when they're laid out properly and transparently, as I've attempted to do today for the actions of Grant King and Matt Kean. So, yep, that's it. That's my call for the first two resignations. Grant King, Matt Kean, I think your positions are untenable. I'm not accusing you of deliberately having done wrong. I think you didn't know the consequences or the full facts behind what you've done and said, which is fine. It's fine if you step down and resign. Otherwise, I think there's a risk that we end up in even more polarized, less factual, less civil debate. So help us course correct and step down.